Imagine this, a gang, right? So impactful that a legal move, an injunction, seems to just stop their murders cold for 2 whole years.
Yeah, quite a statistic to start with.
It really is. Today, we're doing a deep dive into that very group,
Hmm.
the Crenshaw Mafia. They're uh, a set within the Bigger Bloods Gang Alliance.
Right, and we've got some interesting source material to work with here. Articles and, like you said, even some mentions in movies and music.
Exactly. So the mission today is to sift through all that, pull out the key stuff. Where did they come from? What were their activities? How far did they spread?
And how have they been shown in, like, pop culture? Get the core insights for our listeners.
Perfect. So let's jump right in. The origins. It seems like there isn't just one single story.
Well, that's what's interesting right off the bat. The sources you pulled up actually give a couple of different takes on how the Crenshaw Mafia even started.
Okay.
So one version puts them in Inglewood back in the 1970s, and the name comes straight from Crenshaw Boulevard, the big street there.
Right, Crenshaw Boulevard.
Yeah.
So that ties them immediately to a place, gives them that sort of geographical identity from the get-go.
It does. It suggests that kind of neighborhood-based origin, like you said, almost like a local flag.
Yeah.
But then another source points to a bit later, maybe 1981, and it suggests they actually started as sort of an offshoot, members breaking away from the Inglewood family gang.
Huh. So a different kind of origin story there. More about gang evolution, maybe.
Exactly. And this conflict in the details, it's pretty common when you're looking into groups like this. Information can be scattered, or different parts of the group might remember it differently.
Or tell it differently.
Or tell it differently, yeah. It could mean the Crenshaw Mafia identity was maybe more fluid, less defined in those very early days.
Makes sense.
One thing both versions seem to agree on, though, is the primary ethnicity, African American. That seems consistent across the board in the sources.
Okay. So whether it was grassroots from the neighborhood or a split from another gang, it makes you think about those early days. But when we look at what they were doing, the picture seems, well, sadly, a bit clearer.
Yes, unfortunately. The criminal activities that pop up consistently in the sources are murder and drug trafficking.
Right. Pretty standard, tragically, for major gang operations.
Yes, those are often the cornerstones.
So who are they aligned with, and who are they fighting against? That map always seems so complicated.
It really is a complex web. Your sources lay out a few alliances. The LA Denver Lane Bloods, for one.
Yeah?
The Inglewood family gang, which ties back to that second origin theory we mentioned.
Ah, right. Good connection.
Then there's the Athens Park Bloods family, Swan Bloods, and kind of surprisingly, the Juggalos.
Wait, the Juggalos? Fans of Insane Clown Posse. That seems unexpected.
It does stand out, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what's the connection there? Do the sources give any clue? That's not an obvious pairing.
That's a really good question. And honestly, the materials we have don't really dig into the why of that specific alliance. It's just listed.
Huh.
But, sometimes these unusual links can happen, maybe shared territory, maybe some overlap in criminal activities or just connections between certain individuals.
Interesting. It shows alliances aren't always just about traditional gang lines like race or neighborhood.
Definitely. It highlights that fluidity. Now, on the other side, the rivals are maybe more what you'd expect. Imperial Village Crips.
Okay.
Rollin' 90s neighborhood Crips, and the Tungan Crip Gang.
Right. Those kinds of rivalries often go way back. Lots of history there.
Right.
Feeling a lot of the violence, probably.
Deeply entrenched, yeah. Absolutely a driver of conflict.
Okay. Now, one of the most, I guess, striking things in the sources was this injunction you mentioned, 1997. Sounds like a big deal for them.
Oh, it was huge. A major legal move. This was December 97. The LA County DA's office and the LA Sheriff's Department, they went to court and got this injunction specifically targeting the Crenshaw Mafia gangster bloods.
And why? What was the justification?
It was pretty stark, according to the sources. The claim was the gang was responsible for 19 murders. 19 murders in just the 4 years leading up to that injunction.
Wow. Okay, that really paints a picture of the level of violence they were linked to at the time. So what happened? Did it work?
Well, the reported result is pretty remarkable. One of the sources states that for the 2 years right after that injunction went into effect, 0 murders committed by the Crenshaw Mafia.
0, a complete stop.
That's what the source claims. Yeah, a 2-year halt. It's dramatic, and it definitely suggests that kind of focused legal pressure can disrupt things, at least in the short term.
That is a powerful statistic. But it makes you wonder, right? Was the gang actually dismantled? Or did things just go undergrounds, maybe shift to other crimes.
That's the million-dollar follow-up question, isn't it? The injunction seems to have hit the most extreme violence murder really hard right away.
Yeah.
But does that mean they stopped everything, stopped drug trafficking? Or just got quieter about it? Maybe other things were happening that also led to fewer homicides? The sources don't really give us the long-term picture beyond those initial 2 years.
Okay. And the sources also mentioned that their influence wasn't just limited to LA, right? They spread out.
Yeah, that's another key point. By the mid-'80s, apparently they'd already set up shop, essentially, in Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Okay, so quite a reach early on.
Definitely. And there's a specific case mentioned, David Scott, identified as a Crenshaw Mafia member. In November 2014, so much more recently, he killed 2 Crips in Denver.
2014, wow.
Yeah. He ended up getting a 30-year federal prison sentence for it. It's pretty sobering, thinking that decades after they supposedly formed, and even with things like that injunction, people tied to the gang were still involved in serious violence, hundreds of miles away.
Shows how persistent these networks can be. That's a long shadow, like you said.
It really is.
And it wasn't just historical mentions of spread either, was it? There was something more recent, even further east.
That's right. Fast forward to 2024. Atlanta, Georgia. 2 people linked to an Inglewood family gangster bloods set.
And the Inglewood family gang were allies, you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Good catch. They were listed as allies of the Crenshaw Mafia. Anyway, these individuals in Atlanta were arrested for some really serious stuff, including prostituting a minor who was also listed as missing.
Oh.
So even if it's that they're an allied group, it shows this network, these connections, are still active, still concerning, and stretching across state lines. These things can be really far-reaching.
So we've got the real-world violence, the legal actions, the spread. But the Crenshaw Mafia also popped up in pop culture, didn't they? Some big movies.
They absolutely did. Think back to Boys in the Hood, 1991. There's that scene in the classroom, right? They're talking about origins in Africa, and a student snaps back, "I ain't from Africa. I'm from Crenshaw Mafia."
Right. I remember that line. It's quick, but it sticks with you.
It does. And think about the timing. Even if we take the later 1981 formation date, that movie's only 10 years later. It suggests the name, the idea of the Crenshaw Mafia, was already kind of potent in the public mind pretty early on.
That's a great point. Like, the reputation almost built itself or spread faster than maybe even the documented activity did. Kind of like an urban legend starting.
Sort of, yeah. It shows how these things take root. And then, more directly, in the movie Straight Outta Compton.
Ah, yeah, the NWA biopic.
Exactly. From 2015. There's that tense scene on Ice Cube's school bus.
Yeah?
A guy confronts some kids for throwing Crip signs, and he identifies himself very clearly.
What does he say?
He says, remember me, OG2 Tone, Crenshaw Mafia, blood. Leaves no doubt. It really plants the gang firmly in that narrative as a serious presence.
Yeah, it definitely portrays him as a force you don't mess with in that environment. And it wasn't just movies, right? There was music, too.
Yep. The song Piru Love by Bloods and Crips the group, not just the gangs featuring full clips, it mentions the Crenshaw Mafia too. So it just further cements their name within that whole cultural landscape of LA gang life, showing how these identities become part of the art, the expression coming out of those communities.
So, okay, let's try and pull this all together. We've got these somewhat competing origin stories, the 70s Inglewood idea versus the early 80s split from the Inglewood family gang.
Right, the debated start.
Then their main activities, murder, drug trafficking, a whole network of allies, including the surprising juggalos and then the expected rivalries with Cripsettes. Then there's that really striking 1997 injunction that claimed 2-year halt in murders, but questions about the longer-term impact.
The dramatic legal intervention.
Yeah, they're spread, reaching places like Denver, with violent incidents happening decades later, and recent connections through allies even further east in Atlanta.
The geographical reach and persistence.
And finally, how they showed up in iconic movies like Boys in the Hood and Straight Outta Compton. And in music, too. It's quite a complex picture that emerges from all this material.
It really is. And what's striking is seeing how all these different threads, the legal stuff, the expansion, the cultural references kind of weave together. It gives you a fuller, maybe still fuzzy, but a fuller sense of their impact and just how long they've been around.
Absolutely. And hopefully for everyone listening, this deep dive has given you a good, concise overview, pulling from all those different sources, offering some key insights into what's, a really significant part of American gang history.
Yeah, trying to connect the dots.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. When you consider those movie portrayals, the reputation, alongside the very real criminal activity and that spread we talked about, What does the fact that this group, the Crenshaw Mafia, seems to persist, as the sources suggest, tell us about, I don't know, the cycles of gang activity and maybe the enduring power of a name, a reputation, even decades later, despite all the efforts to stalk them?
It's definitely something to chew on. How much is reality, how much is reputation, and how do they feed each other over time?
Exactly. Something to think about.